Hello and welcome to 5 Year Club video number 206 as we read another story in the Japanese family storehouse. This one is the second story in book number 4, A Subterfuge Behind a Literary Screen. Sailing only in winds which are fair and steady, each ship with its experienced lookout able to give 3 days warning of the impending storm when 1-foot-8er clouds are spotted on the Kyushu coast. A voyage in these days need arouse no fears. Thanks to ships which skim across 100 leagues of sea a day, 1,000 leagues in 10, all the world's 10,000 needs are promptly met. A great merchant should model his mind on an ocean-going ship. The man whose life is bounded by the drainage channels round his house, who never risks the soaring leap from door to lands of treasure overseas, will never tap his balance with a magic wishing mallet. Okay, that is the line of this story. Well, that man's never going to tap his balance with a magic wishing mallet. I wish you'd tap your balance with a magic wishing mallet. If only you'd tap your balance with a magic wishing mallet. Say that 10 times fast. It is a pitiful thing to see a lifetime go round and round the pans of the shop scales, and to know nothing of the wide world which lies beyond. To turn from Japan to risky speculations in the China trade, sending one's money clean out of sight, needs boldness and imagination. But at least a Chinese merchant is an honest man, okay, and keeps squarely to his promise. The insides of his rolls of silk are the same as the outsides. His silver is silver, and none of it changes as the years go by. For sheer duplicity, one need go no further than Japan, where the length of needles is made shorter at each delivery, the breadth of cloth grows narrower and narrower, and even paper umbrellas are sold without waterproof. Okay, so this is definitely like some weird nationalistic stuff going on here. Penny wisdom is the ruling principle in our country. If an umbrella is sold, what happens thereafter is no concern of the supplier. It is not he who gets wet. And he is so close-fisted that he would sooner see his own father go naked through a cloudburst than lend him an umbrella free of charge. Many years ago, a thriving business was conducted in the export of small boxes of tobacco to Korea. The cutting and packing was done by workmen in Osaka, and one year, calculating that there was no immediate fear of detection, the manufacturers arranged for the lower layers of boxes to be loosely filled and then soaked in water to make up the weight. During the subsequent voyage across the seas, the tobacco became as hard as rocks and completely lost its virtue as a source of pipe smoke. Although the Chinese were deeply incensed at this, in the next year they placed an order for 10 times the previous amount, and the manufacturers, too eager for profits to suspect a trick, worked in feverish haste to get the goods down to Nagasaki before it was too late. When the boxes were ready and stacked on the dockside, the Chinese rejected them all. Your method of soaking last year's tobacco with cold water was unsatisfactory, they said. This year try pickling it in hot water or in the sea. Ouch. That's some Tea Party stuff right there. The tobacco rotted where it stood and became part of the mud along the foreshore. Swindling, as one may observe from this, has no permanent success. If a man is honest, the gods assist his plans, and if he is pure, the Buddhas enlighten and guide him. In Hakata, in Chikuzen province, trusting all to the whims of heaven, there lived a man called Kanaya, or something like that, a backer of overseas ventures at Nagasaki. Fate on the high seas was against him, and 3 storms in 1 year brought disaster to the expeditions on which he had gambled his life savings. He was left with nothing but his house, his empty store sheds, and the melancholy sound of the wind moaning through the pines in his garden. His servants were given their dismissal, and to his wife and children fell the unhappy lot of never knowing how they might live through the next day. Kanaya, cast suddenly into these troubled waters, with no land in sight, trembled at the mere sound of a wave, and vowed in his heart to the gods of seafarers that he would suffer no descendant of his ever to put anything aboard a ship. One evening he sat on the veranda, longing for a cool breeze, and gazed at the clouds which towered above him in every quarter, peak upon peak. It seemed that at any moment a dragon might soar into them and unleash a summer storm. Man's possessions, he reflected, were no more permanent than those threatening skies. And that his household was poor, even the garden had disappeared beneath a thick layer of dead leaves, and the household itself had changed, almost without his noticing it, to a weed-covered ruin. Now that his household was poor, even the garden had disappeared beneath a thick layer of dead leaves. Man, this is my good practice for reading. Thousands of summer insects were treating its rooms as wastelands in which to sing in desolate chorus. From a large bamboo projecting over the garden wall, a spider was spinning a single thread to the twigs of a cryptomeria. Maybe that's a tree? And he watched its crossing. When it had reached halfway, a sudden gust of wind broke the thread, and the spider hurtled downward in peril of its life. Once more it began spinning, and once more the thread broke. 3 times he saw it meet with disaster, but at last, at the 4th attempt, it made the crossing safely, spun its spider house, and took its supper on the flies which flew in. If an insect like that can be so patient, he thought, after watching the spider respinning its thread again and again, and can cheerfully persevere until its nest is built, how much less excuse has a human being for hasty despair? All is not lost yet. The example of the spider had given him a new heart. He sold his house and everything in it, and bought in a small stock of merchandise, choosing the goods with an eye on current price fluctuations. There were no clerks to do his business for him in the old days, so he took his load down to Nagasaki himself, mingling with the crowds in the import market, passing before piles of other people's treasures. He saw Chinese textiles, medical herbs, shark skin, and tea implements of every kind, all of them, as he knew, destined to rise in price before long. But he had no money for expensive purchases, and he was obliged to leave all these splendid opportunities to the buyers from Kyoto and Sakai. In experience and natural cunning, he was a match for the best of them, but there was nothing he could do now. His leather money satchel contained a mere 50 ryo. Without bothering either to join the merchant's bidding here, or to consider any alternative scheme for his paltry capital, he gave himself up for lost, and went to the brothel quarter at Maruyama. There was a certain first-grade courtesan with whom he had been intimate in the heyday of his wealth, and he was determined that for this one night, if it was for the last time in his life, he would enjoy himself in the old way. Kacho was the girl's name, and with the assistance of their former go-between, the two were brought together again. From their very first meeting, they had felt a genuine affection for each other, and tonight, as they shared their pillow for the last time, they experienced a depth of passion which they had never known before. At the head of the pillow, Kanaya noticed a folding screen. On both faces, it was lacquered in silver, and over the whole surface, with hardly a space between, were pasted specimens of old calligraphy. Not one of these was of inconsiderable merit, and in particular he noted that there were a number of poem sheets of Ogura 100 poets in Fujiwara Taika's handwriting, 6 of which had not even been recorded in the collector's catalogues. The more he looked at them, the more he became convinced that they were on genuine antique paper in Taika's original hand. Who on earth would have given such a screen to this courtesan, he wondered. And now that his greed was thoroughly aroused, the delights of love-making dropped into second place. After this night he visited Kacho frequently, with great regularity, and so cleverly did he play upon her feelings that before long the courtesan cried every minute that he was away, and reached the point where she would have shorn her head of its ebony locks if he had asked for them. When he finally asked her for her screen, she gave it without seeking a word of explanation. At once, hardly stopping to say goodbye, he set off for the home provinces, where he obtained the services of an agent, offered the screen for sale to daimyo, and received an enormous price for it. Once more he became a great merchant, employing as many assistants as in the old days. After his success, Kaneo went down to Nagasaki and bought Kacho her freedom. Since she had set her mind on a young man from a seaside village in Busan province, he sent a handsome dowry to the man's home, together with a complete bridal trousseau and household set, and settled the two in marriage. Kacho's joy knew no bounds, and she vowed that she could never forget her obligations to him. It was true that he made his money by playing a heartless trick on a courtesan, but there are worse methods, and his genius for sizing up an antique in any situation won universal admiration. All right, guys, this is a conflicted story, I've got to say. This last paragraph. It was true that he had made his money by playing a heartless trick on a courtesan, but there are worse methods. I mean, this isn't really a good moral story, right? I mean, it's like this guy kind of does something shady to make money, and they're like, it's not the worst thing I've ever heard. And his genius for sizing up an antique in any situation won universal admiration. Well, I don't think it's a true story, but in some ways, I think that, the kind of mixed morality at the end there, that he kind of fooled her and then sold it, but then bought her freedom, it makes it kind of more of a two-sided story, more of an ambiguous story. I wouldn't say believable exactly, but I think it's higher quality literature. So that is it for video number 206, and that is it for this story, A Subterfuge Behind a Literary Screen. Hope you enjoyed it.